Hello and welcome to the Falmouth Chamber of Commerce Business Education Series on Affordable Housing. I'm your host, Michael Kasparian, President of the Falmouth Chamber of Commerce, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Cooperative Bank of Cape Cod and FCTV for supporting and sponsoring this event. This is the third session in a three-part series on affordable housing. And for those of you who have watched the first two sessions, we did focus on the overall big picture, talked about the current state of affordable housing in Falmouth. And in section two, we differentiated between facts and myth. And here in section three, we're going to be talking about possible creative solutions to the affordable housing crisis we have on Cape Cod. And I'm very pleased to be joined by a group of panelists who are working in the affordable housing industry, helping out, and I'd like to take an opportunity to introduce them and ask them to tell us a little bit about what they do. First, to my right and your left is Jill Nubara, who is the principal of Jill Nubara Architects.
Thank you, Michael. I am an architect and I run a small residential architecture firm in Falmouth. There are a dozen of us in the office. And I started the company in 1994. I arrived on the Cape in 1988. Mm-hmm. And we have focused the work of the office on residential architecture, but mostly single-family homes, often second homes. And about 4 years ago, Michael Galasso and Christian Valley and I got involved in an affordable housing competition that was sponsored by the Cape Cod Young Professionals. And that was my introduction to really beginning to focus on the design of affordable units, the different sizes, the attributes, and what was possible. And it's been terrific to be involved with that and have a place to apply the talent of the firm into affordable housing.
Wonderful. Welcome. Thanks for
you.
being here. Michael Galasso, affordable housing developer. And I know that you've done an awful lot here in town, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for inviting me to participate. Really appreciate it. And my family's been in Falmouth since 1961. And I went to school here, graduated from Boston College, went out to California and spent 30 years out there developing affordable housing, mostly revitalizing the downtown area of San Diego. So my whole professional career has been involved in developing affordable housing. We were one of the first companies to use what's called low-income housing tax credit, so we've used a variety of programs in order to develop our housing. And my mom got sick, and I came back here in 2008 and thought that I'd take all my experience for over 20 years in San Diego and apply it here to develop some affordable housing. Worked with a nonprofit at the time. We renovated 20 Shore Street here in Falmouth, the Clipper Ship apartments, and I spent a lot of time developing and renovating properties in New Bedford and also in Brockton. I currently have a project under construction in North Falmouth that took us a few years to get started with the help of Christian. He's our contractor. It's now under construction and should be completed this fall. And it's 10 affordable 2- and 3-bedroom apartments. It's 100% electric, so there's no fossil fuels involved. And we added electric car charging stations to the garages. Great. Too. So I think we try to be a little bit ahead of the time. Huh. And as Jill mentioned about the importance of design, many of the projects that I've done over the years have won design awards. We don't do them to win design awards, but we always felt that the design was very important into revitalizing the neighborhoods that we worked in. Great. So fortunately enough, we won a number of design awards and really considered the design of our projects to be high priority. So that's what I spend my time in. And as a affordable housing developer, you're sort of a jack of all trades. First of all, you're like a conductor of an orchestra because you're working with contractors, you're working with architects, attorneys, financial partners. And to put these projects together requires a lot of work because unlike sort of market rate projects where you may have one lender, our projects have multiple lenders, multiple resources in order to make it work and make those projects affordable. So it's a challenging business, but it's very rewarding too. And the rewarding part is when you see those families move into their units and they realize that they're home and they have a place they can afford for the rest of their lives. And that's the rewarding part of why we do this. A lot of people ask me, why'd I get into this line of business and how rewarding it is. It's very rewarding. And I got in this line of business, I think it goes back to my Aunt Tilly, who actually owned the Falmouth Diner many, many years ago, which is now Betsy's.
Yeah.
But anyone who came into the diner that didn't have money to pay for a meal, Tilly would just put them to work, so she never refused anyone.
Huh.
And I think that
great.
helping others came from her. I didn't realize it at the time, but I think that drive to help other people came from my Aunt Tilly many years ago at the diner.
It's a great story. Thank you, Michael. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Angela Scott Price, member of our select board.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you, Michael. I am a member of your Falmouth Select Board, and when I ran my campaign, one of my major platforms was affordable housing. And so it's something that is very important to me. I think it should be important to everyone. And I want to stay true to what I said I wanted to advocate for in my role on the board is affordable housing. So I'm participating in these conversations and outside conversations to see what the board can do to really support affordable housing, because it's important for our community and for our people and the people who I serve on the board.
And I think what was important in session 2, which we had just before this one, Angela spoke a little bit about the commitment from the select board, because that's what we're looking for is leadership in town. And the select board really takes affordable housing seriously, and it is a priority. So thank you for being here, for helping to drive that and collaborating with everyone else here, because we know that's really going to be the solution to keeping our town safe for everybody and bring equilibrium to our town.
Absolutely.
Christian Valley, president of the Valley Group. I know you build a lot of good stuff.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks for having us. Yes, I have a family-owned business, and we've been in Falmouth now. Actually, my parents came here in, I think, the late 60s, and we've been here for a while. My wife and I, both from Falmouth, and when we moved back to Falmouth, I would say sometime, I believe it was around 2005, where the business was growing, and we were very much involved in building affordable housing, rentals, and a lot of fee simple ownership. And I have a vested interest in this. I have 3 young kids between the ages of 15, my oldest, and 9, and I'm thinking to myself, where are they going to live when they're ready to buy a home in 10 or 20 years? So for me, it's really a personal, there's a personal ambition, because I'd like to see them be able to live and grow and thrive in a place that I love. So we've done a lot of projects in Falmouth, done work for the Housing Trust, the Housing Corp, doing the project with Michael right now. I take a lot of pride in it. We do a lot of high-end remodeling and new homes as well, but I think Michael said it when he said, you really get a real deep sense of pride when you build something that people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it can move in. I mean, this is a community that we have a lot of second homes, people that are affluent, and to them it's just a second home. They come down for 3 or 4 months, they enjoy it, and then they go back to their other homes. But for someone that's living here full time, something a little bit more rewarding about being able to give them what I would say a first home. So yeah, thanks for having me.
And you also built the units for the Friends of Fairwinds, did you not?
Yes.
A few years back?
Yep, we did that on Catherine Lee Bates. Yep, yeah, we did that.
Outstanding, and there's a good example of how you can build some nice units for to take
Yeah.
care of a need.
Yeah, those were what we would call micro apartments. They were small. They were about 400 square feet, 400 or 500 square feet, and it was almost like an infill piece. It was a very small piece of land, and we were able to just get 4 units in there. But what a difference it makes! And it was also in a great location, so central to town, walking distance to just about anything on Main Street. So that was a great project.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Great. And Wayne Lingefelter, who is the Executive Director of the Falmouth Economic and Development Industrial Corporation, who's with us session 1. So welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for having me.
Yeah, you're
Appreciate the
welcome.
opportunity to speak a couple of times. I think what I would say is that Falmouth EDIC is the town's primary agency that's responsible for creating and trying to grow our business base, which is, of course, important to the community. Over the years, the EDIC has taken on a number of causes almost. So the audience might be familiar with the work that was done to completely renovate the Falmouth bus station to be the transportation that it is. Michael Galasso sits on the EDIC board and was instrumental in that work. But the EDIC has also taken on projects like improved internet service, was very active in establishing the solar array, the solar farm on the capped landfill on Thomas Landers Drive. So I think if you look at what is now a 40-year history of the EDIC, it's taken on challenges that the community faced or opportunities that maybe other organizations didn't quite have a focus on. And I think the board recognizes over the last year or two the importance of housing and how that has an impact on the vibrancy of our business community. And so, they've challenged themselves and challenged me in the course of that to, try to make a contribution towards that question of affordable housing in the community. And so we look forward to doing that. We're kind of just getting to start at it. I think we have some interesting ideas, and appreciate the opportunity to speak to the topic today.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear about those ideas. And so on session one, again, we talked about the big picture issue of affordable housing, and hopefully did a good job in explaining to the television audience of really just how dire the situation is here in Falmouth, Cape Wide, but we're focusing on in Falmouth. And then session two, talking specifically about the agencies and what they do. So in this session, I'd like to kind of open it up and just kind of start talking a little bit about what are some of the possible solutions. I know in session two, we touched very briefly on zoning being a big challenge. And we talked about, zoning has to change first and foremost. Not zoning everywhere, but in some parts. But, if somebody can pick up on that and maybe talk a little bit about how we start there and then other ideas of, how we move forward.
Well, if I may start, Michael, I think because of our existing zoning, most new affordable housing projects are going to be built using what's known as 40B, and I know you discussed that in your second session. And, that's a very long process to go through. We've got great people and staff at Town Hall that help us through that process, but I still think there's some things that can be done to improve it, mostly on a timing situation. Some better coordination. And see, these are things that we don't have to go outside our town in order to improve. Process is very, very important to a developer, because there's a lot of risk involved in these projects, or any real estate project. A lot of money that we put out just to get to a hearing. And knowing that once you get there, if there's a way for us to sort of expedite that process. If we think that affordable housing is important in our community, then it needs to be a priority. It has to be placed in front of an expansion of a Dunkin' Donuts. Not that we don't need Dunkin' Donuts in our community, but if affordable housing is a priority, it's got to have a priority position on the agenda. A lot of times we'll go to one meeting and then it gets delayed to another meeting, but that next meeting may be months away. And just need to find a way that it becomes a priority on their agendas, and that we get heard in a quick manner. I think they recently did that on the project on Scranton Ave that the Falmouth Housing Corp is doing. That went through the process very quickly. If we can duplicate that for all our 40B projects. But I think it's also important that 40B projects are well done, because when one isn't well done, or recently we've had some that didn't quite meet all the requirements that were in their project plans that were approved, it just shines a bad light on us trying to do other good 40Bs. So I think it's important that we emphasize to the developers who get 40Bs the importance of making sure that it's done according to the plans that they got approved. So I think there's some room to help in sort of the processing that we currently have in place that could expedite the process for us a little bit more.
So this project that you and Christian are working on right now, Megansett Crossing in
Yep.
North Falmouth.
Yep.
How long has that process taken from beginning to end? Just so people can understand.
A lot of ups and downs. So I bought the project from a gentleman in North Falmouth who had already had a 40B approved, but it wasn't really what we thought was appropriate for the site, so we went back and redesigned it. At one time, we wanted to add, there are 10 units. We thought that we could fit another building on there and get 12 units, and that was denied by the ZBA. So let's go back and redesign.
Michael, I'm just sorry, what was the justification for that? Do you remember why the 12?
They felt that buildings that were 20 feet apart were too close together.
Okay.
That was the main reason.
Okay.
Yep. And so it was back to a redesign with our architect. And then one thing about affordable housing is that because they're affordable and the rents are below quote market rates, we have to get subsidies from various governmental agencies in order to do the project. Megantic Crossing, for instance, has a subsidy from Mass Housing through Department of Housing and Community Development. And there are cycles that you have to apply for. You don't just apply and automatically get the money. And if you miss one of the cycles or you don't quite make the cutoff, then it's another year before you can apply again. So it's those type of cycles for funding that push project timelines out quite a bit too. Luckily, we work with someone as good as Christian and his dad that stuck with us over a 5-year period from the time I acquired the property to the time we broke ground. And there was a lot of changes in that 5-year period. I mean, recently, as everyone knows, lumber prices more than tripled. So we have a set budget, and we have a set amount of money. Now, all of a sudden, lumber and other material go up. And what choice do we have besides go to our lenders and ask for more funding, which we did, and which we're very grateful to the state that helped us out. But yeah, it's a long process.
I'm curious if you could explain to the audience a little bit about the Falmouth Affordable Housing Fund, and as a developer, how you go into that fund to support your affordable housing developments.
Well, it's great that we have a fund here in Falmouth that we can go to, and administered by the select board, but they have a working group too. And because of the recent increase in cost, they've recently increased the amount that they can give to each affordable unit from $60,000, which we got from Megantic Crossing, up to $100,000. And that was really neat, I know, for some other projects that were in the pipeline. But, what's nice about it is that it is quick. You submit a letter to the housing coordinator, which I hear we have a new housing coordinator, which is great. And they talk to the town manager's office. And then they have a small working group that gets together and forward their recommendation onto the selectmen. So that is probably the quickest process of all the processes that we have to go through. But when we're dealing with the state, first of all, the state wasn't real interested in small projects. And that's mostly what we do here on the Cape is 10, 20 unit, projects, because they have a lot of money they need to get out the door every year. So they eventually formed a fund just for smaller projects, which really helped us out in working with Mass Housing too. And I will say that the state and DHCD was very quick and very helpful when prices went up. We needed more money from Megantic Crossing. But the Falmouth Affordable Housing Fund now has gotten more money into it. All we need is more good projects in order to use those funds, and that's really what we need to do. And I think that some of these suggestions that we have and that we'll discuss here today will help us generate more good projects. There are, as you know, there aren't a lot of people who do this. And, it's a very tough business. And so, nurturing us, and also, we need to get more young folks involved in this process, too, and understand that we need some more young developers. Christian, I know, can use some more young workers, too.
Yeah.
I think
I
it
mean,
might be
I'm
worth,
sorry.
excuse me.
No, I was just gonna say, your point about workers, the people that we're building these homes for are subs, and they need places to live, and so it's a cycle, if the subs, if my vendors and my contractors don't have places to live and their employees don't have places to live, then who's building it? So, that's, the labor issue is a real issue on the Cape. It's an issue nationwide at this point, but it's a real issue on the Cape. It's just hard getting subcontractors who can get reliable help, because the reliable help doesn't want to drive from, an hour away because
Sure.
they can't afford to live here. So we're building, the guys that are actually building these homes or these apartments are the same guys that need them. So it's like, it's just that cycle.
I was just going to mention, Angela, with respect to your question, it's probably worth noting that the primary source of funding for the Falmouth Affordable Housing Fund, which is really the primary vehicle on these, the funding that Michael talks about, is the CPC. So, that's an example. I think since 2016, they've contributed about $1 million a year. Not each year, but on average over that period of time, which is a significant amount of money that's been able to be put to use on projects like Michael's. And I think that's a good example of how, there's a broad group of different organizations that need to kind of step up and contribute to finding a solution. But that's the far and away the biggest contributor to affordable housing funding in our community.
Yeah, and CPC is Community Preservation Committee.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And they funded 20 Shore Street, which was one of the first projects I did in town, too.
So, we were talking a little bit in the second session, we're talking about affordable housing, and people are like, ugh, it looks like a box of this, and I think Joe can kind of speak to, it doesn't have to be like that.
Right.
And I think that people are not educated to how it can actually look and blend into neighborhoods. And if you could offer your thoughts on that.
It's such an important piece because most of us see projects that didn't have the opportunity to be designed well, either because the developer didn't have that intention, but possibly it's because of there's an added cost at the beginning to design things well. And our culture doesn't have deep roots in the public saying, we've got a lot of understanding here that if you design this well, it will be beautiful, it will be contextual, it will fit in, it will be an asset to the built environment. And, we have all been hearing in the last decade or so about social justice, racial justice, gender justice. But one of the things that I'm interested in is aesthetic justice, because it is special to create something that is beautiful or helpful or functional. And that is often reserved for people of privilege and neighborhoods of privilege or towns that are really have so much asset that high-end developers come in. And so it builds this cycle of when an affordable housing project often is, let's say, just not designed. It's just designed for functionality to get in the number of units. And then it gets put out to the community, this is what it's going to look like. And absolutely rightfully so. They don't want that in their neighborhood. And I wrote about this in an article that said, I wouldn't want that in my neighborhood, not because it's affordable housing, but because it's not designed. And it's not beautiful, and it's not interesting as a built element that's going to be there for 20 or 30 or 100 years. So one of the ideas that I think is important and may be helpful is to have a fund that supports the design fees of projects. So a developer, a builder could come to the board, the select board, and say, this is my project, these are the architecture fees. Here's the architect I'd like to use, or here's the team of designers. And these are the architecture fees that don't fit well into the funding structure of affordable housing. Will you fund the design fees? Because then those fees are modest compared to the cost of construction. And once something is designed well, and then you put it out to the community or the neighbors and say, this is what will happen on this corner, this is what will happen in your backyard, they don't have to be terrified. Because I think the first reaction of anybody is, oh God, what's it gonna look like?
Sure.
And what's it gonna
Right.
do to my property values?
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you can start to offer communities well-designed buildings, it's going to take a while, but that instant fear factor can be reduced because there could be some trust that you don't, it's like, oh, now I got to gear up. Now I got to take the little bit of free time I have to get involved, to fight this project because I don't want that. I don't want to look at that. I don't want to drive by it. Nobody should. And that's what most of the projects are. So I think as a community, you could apply this anywhere across the country, any region, any town, that if we can support design. For example, the project at EDIC up at the depot, and I think about 2-3 months ago, some schematic ideas for different strategies were presented, very schematic. But people will latch on to, oh gosh, is that really going to look like a large flat roof building? Or is that an intention about we'd like to get this much housing, or we could have this green space or this built space? And the more that we can show in renderings, what's it really going to look like and it's well designed, then it's uplifting. Then it's fun. And you say, oh, cool. Like when you go into a town that has some neat new building, we have some really good big buildings here that are good looking, really well done. And you go, oh, great. And your blood pressure kind of goes, okay, all right, That's nice. That's helpful to our built environment.
Nice.
Well,
So I
yeah.
think design is
I
critical.
mean, at one point, there was discussion about a design review committee for the zoning board, or, I mean, if you go into any, master plan community or any upscale neighborhood, there's a design review committee, and they want to see what you're doing before you do it, and I think that's helps preserve the architectural integrity of the neighborhood or the community. So I agree. I think there needs to be some design standards for some of this. Now, we don't want to impose, unreasonable standards, but there has to be a standard of design that makes sense, because it helps for everybody.
Well, and it's a fun idea that if Falmouth were known as a community that funded high-level design, developers would want to come here to say, oh, they've got this fund that supports 40B and affordable housing, and they will fund terrific design. That right there is a step up. And again, it's a fraction of funding the cost of construction and other components. But that could start to encourage an atmosphere of the creative people wanting to be affiliated with Falmouth and the developers wanting to come here to bring these teams together. And then we could start making better-looking buildings.
Well, it's certainly going to take collaboration, to get everybody
Yes.
together. And I think you're right as far as the visual piece of it. People don't really understand unless they see a visual. And, kind of just since you had mentioned, the project, I'd like to just, ask Wayne to comment a little bit about that and
Sure.
vision-wise, and because I know it's been out there a little bit, but I think it's a great example
Right.
of here is an opportunity. And tell us a little about it.
Sure, no, I appreciate the opportunity. In a nutshell, this Falmouth station actually sits on state-owned ground. As you would expect, it was a railroad station. The EDIC back in 2015 or 2016 reached an agreement with the state to sign a long-term lease. So the EDIC is a stakeholder there for 95 years. So in effect, we own the property, and not only is it the building that most people would think of when we say the Falmouth Station, but it's also in the associated parking lots, but there's also a vacant lot that's associated with that kind of settles right in behind, next to the Steamship Authority, and it fronts out onto Depot Avenue. It's a rather odd-shaped parcel, but the board decided a couple of years ago that they wanted to look into the possibility of putting that underutilized parcel back into a more productive use, and we're able to secure some state funding to do that. This is a little bit along the lines of what Jill was referencing, and of course, as a quasi-public body, everything that we do, we want to be transparent about, and so we went through about a 6-month process where we studied the site, and really we're just trying to establish some, at this point, because it's very early, some conceptual ideas around size and scale, because again, as Jill suggested, that's what people initially gravitate to. So our focus was really to try to understand what might be able to be done on the site, and we kind of looked at, took community input across a range of alternatives that ranged from, frankly, nothing to plans that would support some of the workforce housing that the community might need. And there seemed to be a consensus. I mean, it wasn't unanimous, because it's a neighborhood and neighborhoods have opinions, but there seemed to be a consensus that it's proximate to downtown. It's very walkable to our main street. Obviously, it's next door to a transportation center. It's largely a commercial neighborhood. The Steamship Authority offices are there, which are quite large. So it seemed as if there were some reasons why exploring options to provide that location or housing in that location made sense. And that's about where we are right now. The study that we did, again, funded by Mass Development, focused much less on architecture, and I think it's fair to say that maybe in a perfect world, we'd have a little bit more of that work done, but we're a quasi-public organization, so we take certain steps, and we try to be transparent when we do that. But I think we do feel like there's a very logical solution there for some form of housing, and exactly what size and what scale, we hope to continue to study.
It's great. I remember when we first heard about that, we were thrilled, thought that that was a great opportunity, because like you said, one option is to do nothing and just leave the land vacant, but here you are. And now, if you throw in Jill's notions of design, it's a win-win for everybody.
Right.
And, you know, density is the issue. There's an area you can put in density. So we should talk a little bit about density. We did talk about zoning earlier, but, you know, what really needs to be done to allow more affordable housing in town?
I think the overlay district that was approved at November town meeting is a really good example. And we've already had one developer come to the select board with plans to change an existing business, and I don't know the status of that business, but to change that business to a different business and add in 10 apartments onto that. And they can now do that by right because of that zoning change and that overlay district. And so I think that's a really good place to start, is that was pretty well received at town meeting. There was some on-the-floor adjustments to make sure that it stayed along the sewer, but overwhelmingly, it seemed like the people who vote for that, which are town meeting members, were very enthused about it. And so I was very excited to see somebody come to the board recently with a plan. And I asked them how long it had taken, and said about 5 months for them to go through all of their design processes to get to the board. So I know there's a lot more they have to go through as far as actually demolishing the building and building and whatnot, but to get that far in the process in just 5 months seemed a lot quicker than anything that I had heard before.
5 years.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Your point about sewer is really interesting, because I was talking about this earlier. I mean, Megansett Crossing is a perfect example of, if we had sewer there, there'd be 2 more buildings there, so there'd be 4 more apartments. So the problem, a lot of the problem with developing on the Cape is, where do you put the septic system? So you got a big piece of land, and half of it is septic, so the more we can sewer some of the areas, the better we can, the more density we can get, to be honest. So I think we need, you know, the plan is for hopefully the next 50 years, sewer the town, and I think that, I mean, less, again, the septic systems, the Title V systems that we have to build, and some of them are nitrogen reducing, so they make you build them even, and I'm all for that, but if we can get more sewer, you're gonna get more density on smaller pieces of land. And I think that's going to allow us to do more. And like I said, Megansett Crossing is a perfect example, where we have a very large septic system down towards the lower half of the parcel, which easily could be 2 more buildings if we had sewer on the street.
Good sewer.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, not everybody wants a big house on an acre lot, right? We were talking about that in the last sessions. There would be plenty of people who would be happy to live in a multifamily or in a unit that's in a building that may have 1 to 4 units, and that's just non-existent here. And again, we go back to the zoning question, and we had talked about how, you know, parts like in Hatchville is a 2-acre minimum to build a single-family house right now, and how it came up on the last town meeting when we were talking about the town fire station. And somebody had said that, you know, based on that calculation, they could build 160 houses now in Hatchville, which is a drop in the bucket. That's not going to work. So, you know, is education a big part of this? I mean, what are some of the solutions, you know, that you think? And they, you know, I know we have to start thinking differently.
Yeah. You know, nationwide, to tackle this issue, which is it's a nationwide
Certainly is.
issue. Some communities have basically outlawed single-family zoning, where, you know, it's now 2 units per lot. You know, taking some bold steps that would allow, for an example, accessory dwelling units on any lot that can meet certain requirements in town could go a long way to expanding the number of accessory dwelling units. Now, I think it's a great program, and, you know, that was adopted by the planning board and by the town. But I think there are some things that can be done to tweak it to make it even better. First of all, it's an ordinance. It's not a program. I just used the word program. We're asking individual land property owners to become developers and build an accessory dwelling units. Now, HAC has just started a program to help that process. But you're still asking an individual landowner to almost be a developer. Some communities have said, let's just lease backyards. You've got a backyard that we can fit a building on, we'll rent that backyard from you. We'll build an accessory dwelling unit. You don't have to do anything. Just rent us your backyard. We'll, whether it's a nonprofit or for-profit, we'll build an accessory dwelling unit. We'll get all the financing. We'll lease it up. We'll manage it for you. I think if we have a program instead of just a ordinance, that might be get us more units too. And that's something that's happening, you know, throughout the country.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's taking some bold steps, it's taking some risk, but calculated risk with, some good planning behind it too, to make sure that, as Jill said, that we get, well-designed. And that's what we worked on, Jill, Christian, and myself, on the competition, with some accessory dwelling units. And I think we've got to start looking at how we build our buildings differently too. We have a labor shortage.
Yeah.
It's very severe. Our contractor, one of our subcontractors out of Megantic Crossing, is offering a very substantial bonus for anyone that will come to work for him. They've got to meet certain requirements, certain licenses and everything. He got one application.
Wow.
One application. So I think we've got to really start looking at building our housing off-site,
And bringing it in.
and bringing it in. We still need people like Christian and other contractors to help put it together and everything and supervise and stuff, but I think the majority of the work needs to be done in the factory. And I think we can start driving down the cost a little bit too. There was a recent article in the Cape Cod Times just last week, talked about the accessory dwelling units and how they're now permitted throughout most towns on the Cape. But one of the quotes in here from a builder was, it cost $600,000 to build one, 800 square feet.
Well,
And we know
it's outrageous.
we've gone through the numbers with Christian for some of the ones that we worked on. They're expensive.
Outrageous.
They're expensive.
Yeah.
So we've got to find a way to drive down that cost. And I think one of the ways is that if we can get sort of a modular that looks great, that meets all the requirements, and can be built in a factory, we can start driving that price down
Yeah.
in the time factors involved in that too.
We have a nephew who lives in Los Angeles, and it's somewhat similar to the accessory dwelling unit bylaw. They offered, it was a fixed number, it was by permit application to go in, and they had a lot, long lots where top of the house is here, and these yards that really couldn't be utilized. And that's exactly what happened. The city of Los Angeles actually came in and helped facilitate. And what they did was, they went to a firm that does this, they prefabbed this dwelling unit, they brought it in, I think it was 30 to 60 days it was done, all set, ready to rent out and done. And then the city of
Yeah.
Los Angeles now picked up, another unit that they could put people in. So you're right, thinking outside of the box would be very, very helpful.
Yeah.
But buildings going in that direction anyway, isn't it, building off-site?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the cost of construction, I mean, if you look at inflation in general, what is it, 7%, 8 right now? I mean, I would say that's for the, consumer goods. I would say that inflation in the construction industry is probably 30 or 40%. I
Insane.
mean, that's just, since COVID, it's gone crazy. And when COVID started, it was March of 20, I guess, was it 20? And I think a lot of us in the industry were saying, we're done, we're not, this is going to be the end of construction. Well, it was the opposite. So everybody sat home and said, geez, wouldn't it be nice if I finished my basement, or if I built that shed I've been thinking about, or now we can work from home now, let's move to the Cape full-time, because we don't need our house in the suburbs. So the demand was there, and then the demand, blew up, and costs of goods have gone through the roof. So yeah, it's gotten exponentially more expensive to build anything at this point, and we have trouble getting stuff. Lead times on windows are, anywhere from 6 to 8 months on some windows and cabinets, and so the industry has to change, because I don't see it getting any better in the next few years. So we have to find ways to source materials more efficiently, to use different materials, build modular. Panelization is another means of building that we've done before, where you panelize a wall section and you bring it on site. All these things, all these new ways of doing it need to be discussed. And it's not just for affordable, it's for everything that's being built now, because it's just, the industry has changed so much in the past 2 years. And the lack of labor available, the cost of materials, the lead times is going to change the construction industry, and I just see it coming.
Those, those are critically important inputs to affordability, but going back to where you kind of started your comments, Michael, there's what's in our control, because costs we can work at, but the density is really where you can gain ground on some of these questions around having more affordable units. And so that's what was so refreshing about having the overlay zone passed, and now it's a question of implementation, and to the point that Michael made about how we can implement more efficiently. And and do it in a way that's, you know, in the right context, because people have a reaction to density. You know, in a community like ours, it's not always a positive view, but I think it can be done correctly. It's certainly what our intent would be if we get to that point at the Falmouth station. You know,
But what's interesting, I know one of the issues, of course, is sewering. But let's say we're able to solve that issue, or we're getting to that point. Many homes in Falmouth are on 7,500 square foot lots. Now, if you come with a better design, I mean, my house, I grew up on a 6,000 square foot lot. Of course, we were in the city. You know, my first home was on a 4,000 square foot lot. But if you're living in a neighborhood where everybody's on a 7,500 square foot lot, and you have a 1,500 square foot home, you know, that's the part for me, and I'll put this out to you as an architect. Can we design these buildings to be better, smarter, more efficient? Do you need a $3,000 square foot home? I mean, if you can build something for 1,500 square feet, the cost is going to go down. You can put it on a smaller lot. It's going to be easier to maintain. And can we just be smarter? And then, do we need to call it affordable? Can it just be affordable?
Or community housing. You know, I think the labels that we put on these buildings is not helpful. I understand why that means something, certainly from all the funding point of view. But again, yes, you can design anything well of any size. You can get down to 400 square feet, 400 or 500 square feet like Christian built on Gifford and Catherine Lee.
Bates, yeah.
Anything can be designed well. It's feeling that really matters, and that you're willing to help people make that better choice and helping to fund that choice up front. You know, for example, I think that project up at the depot, the bus station, is a fantastic location for housing and dense housing. And it can really work there if those buildings are beautiful, respectful of the bus station, which is all of their intentions. And those are the images that people have to see, because it's not fair to presume that anybody can visualize what a successful project looks like. Again, we don't have much exposure to that anywhere in the country. And there is so much talent all over the world, in this country, in the New England region, for all scales of solutions, whether it's one-off accessory dwelling units that sit in the back of a Cape Cod home, or if it's, you know, some neat modern ones that are sitting in a little bit bigger site someplace else in town. So I would say that design is your greatest investment, because then you're going to get community support, you're going to get neighbor support, the fear factor drops, and we start to build a good-looking community, and that all keeps feeding on itself.
I think good design is also important for the people who are going to be living in these
Yeah.
places. You want them to have a sense of pride of where they're going to live. I remember going to visit a Habitat for Humanity home in Mashpee before they started building in Falmouth, and I learned that there was someone who donated different types of tile and granite for the homes and let the homeowners choose instead of just whatever could be afforded. And I thought that was amazing. It was just beautiful that these people were being able to take real pride in their home and have choices made, because part of it, if you're looking for an affordable place, you don't have as many choices. You obviously aren't involved in the design process. You're not involved in location. If there's one available, you're going to take it. And so knowing that you're going home to a beautiful space that was very thoughtful, that's designed beautifully, really goes a long way for the people who are going to be living in them as well.
It's absolutely critical, and we wrote about that in the Aesthetic Justice article, that it works at every level, because if you're the kid on the bus who comes out of a housing development that has to be behind a fence, because the neighbors said the only way we're going to tolerate that is if you put it behind a fence, and frankly, a lot of those should be behind fences because they are not aesthetic. The pride, or the lack thereof, or the diminishment of spirit, as I call it, that everybody, whether you can identify it or articulate it or draw it, when you go into a building that has some dignity and some intelligence and sunlight, and you are the person who gets to occupy that, and your children get to leave the school bus and come to that home, that's an entirely different community spirit, integrity, and it's aesthetic justice for the people who get to occupy that. And that's something we feel is terribly important. There's a project that's quite a bit older, just heading out of town behind a fence, and I remember when the town required them to put a fence up. And I was like, well, it's a really bad project, but what a terrible thing for the people who have to go behind the fence.
Sure, of course, you're right.
So I think that all folds into design, which is about dignity and integrity and becoming a community that has a stronger built environment that builds, and people want to come to Falmouth and go down Main Street because it's attractive. And when we do a successful project, it raises that bar. And when we do a project that we had sort of 5 categories in the office, sitting around having a beer and say, there are projects that are neutral. There are projects that are an improvement. There are projects that greatly help. But then there are projects below the line that are unfortunate. And then there's true soul-sucking diminishment of the built environment. And you have that range. And we as a community can choose to support the design to help developers make those better choices.
Can I ask Jill a question?
Sure, of course.
We have a great design community. We have great
Yeah.
artists in our community. How do we get them involved in this process? I mean, it's great to have you, but there are many others that we could have involved in this process that could help with us. How do we do that? How do we get them involved? In taking that talent that they have, and as you have done, and put it into affordable housing.
Well, that's a great question. When the 3 of us were working on the competition for the affordable housing, which was such a neat idea, because I think my understanding is that Cape Cod young professionals said, okay, competition, if you win, you give your intellectual property rights to Cape Cod young professionals. We are going to then make those drawings available to anybody who wants them for free, to start to help people to build architecturally designed affordable housing. Great idea. And that's a really exciting way to start to do this. We could have a neat not competition, but a thing where every architecture firm in town is encouraged to design an accessory dwelling unit. So we designed some very fresh, modern ones, but then we also designed one that's kind of a sweet, more traditional cottage that would pair well with the more traditional homes. And if we could get a library of these things and potentially give the plans to the Board of Selectmen, to the zoning board, and say, you can have this one design if it gets built in Falmouth. And so I think that there are ways, because we do have so much design talent in town. There are great offices here. We've got a lot of architects.
So the question I have too is that great design, we've got great design, let's say we've got the sewers and all, collaboration with the town. So obviously we're back to zoning still. At what point, and should the town be taking a lead on this? And I'm not pointing to any particular part of the town, but is there a public-private partnership possible? Perhaps it may underwrite the cost of land. We're all huge proponents of open space and maintaining open space, but, there's a lot of open space. And we talked in the last session about an overlay that HAC is doing about some places that should be open space because of their protecting certain species or water, et cetera. But then there are other places that are open just because they're open, and could you put homes in there? If there's town-owned property, is it viable in order to enter into some type of public-private partnership where a developer can go into the town and a builder, and the land is basically provided by the town? Does that happen? Do you see that happening? Is it possible?
Well, we're sort of looking at that for the station. I mean, we're sort of laying the groundwork to then issue a request for proposal to the
Sure,
developers
that I
and stuff.
understand, and of course, that's under EDIC's
Yeah.
control. But I mean, like, let's say the town owns a lot somewhere in the middle of town, or a big piece of land, that's really basically not being utilized for anything, it's just out there.
Well, it'd be nice for the town to give us a map of where all that is.
Okay.
That'd be a very good starting point.
I agree.
We've been handed assessors' parcels numbers, but then we've got to go out and put it all together. But if the town could hire an intern that just gives us a map, and then we can debate which parcels would be appropriate to develop affordable housing.
And
But
And maybe there's an affordable housing district. I mean, I don't mean that, but there's an area that's designated for the creation of, I like to say workforce housing, because that's what it is, it's for
or
the.
at least a percentage of it has to be.
Yeah,
be
but
affordable.
higher than, I think 40B is 20%.
20%,
So,
right.
I mean, that really, if you're building 5, that's not a lot. So maybe they allow more density if you bring that percentage up in that district.
Right.
And obviously the design, all the other things we've talked about would have to be included there, but, and the permitting, as Michael said, is less rigorous. Everything from permitting to planning and is all sort of, there's a roadmap for that. So it's not as onerous, and doesn't take 5 years to build 10 apartments.
So I'll say at a board meeting probably a couple months ago now, I had this idea of the town hiring a consultant
Mhm.
to do exactly what you said, is to look at the town-owned parcels and the spaces that are not already open space, or even some private spaces, and to come have an outside consultant do that work, because there's a lot of legwork to look at, like you said, the assessor's map, and then actually going to look at these places and seeing who owns them, are they leasable, all these things, and actually have this person come back to the town and say, these are the places that town owns or town could easily acquire, or is state-owned even, and this is where you should look to put some of your
Yeah.
housing, because the town could say, we're going to sell this for pennies on the dollar, or just give it because we say it's a priority. In the second session, Lisa from Housing Assistance Corporation said that they worked with the Association to Preserve Cape Cod, and they came up with a map where they looked at where HAC wanted to put housing, where the APCC said we need to preserve, and they found where it didn't overlap, where APCC wasn't concerned about these parcels, but they look good for housing, and vice versa. And she said that's going to be published in the next week or so. And so we'll definitely be taking a look at that. And that was a lot of I believe that is just state property, state-owned property. So I think we need to do it again for the town, but it's a really good starting place for us.
Yep.
But I do think the town has to take leadership, and I know that on the board, we have often talked about affordable housing and how important it is. And we've seen that at town meeting, we're voting to put money in affordable housing. There was no discussion. It was just voted
Yeah.
in the blanket, which was amazing. And so we on the board have said that it's a priority. It's in our strategic plan, and I know it will be for the upcoming years. And so we are looking at ways that we can do, like you said, looking at properties. And we also want to hold a discussion with members of the community to come out and let us know what outside of the box ideas they have. And we also have a lot of people who are not from Falmouth, and they've lived other places in other countries, and they'll be able to come tell us what works in other communities that we might be able to tweak and make work here as well.
And I
Yeah,
think
because the town has something very powerful. They've got money. We now have more money in the Affordable Housing Fund. And I think with that money, you can demand some of the things we've talked about, which is good design. We demand that the houses be at a minimum net zero, so they don't use any fossil fuel energy. Megantic Crossing, as Christian knows, is 100% electric. If we could add solar panels to the roof, that would help too. But because you have that power of the money that developers, all of us need in order to make these projects work, you can demand a lot. And if developers know what you're demanding up front, they'll comply. It's when they go to a hearing and they're surprised, which is where you get the pushback. But if they know, look, this project has to be net zero, got to have a renewable source to it, it's got to be well-designed by a well-qualified architect who's done affordable housing before. If you demand those type of things, I think we would start to see some better projects that meet some of those criteria. We shouldn't fund any project that's not net zero and doesn't have a renewable component to it. We just shouldn't. That's just the way that we're headed.
Well,
Yeah.
and this is a tangential story from history, but Santa Fe, New Mexico, at the turn of the last century, early part of the 1900s, offered housing. They would build a casita to any artist who would come to live in Santa Fe because they wanted to build an artist community 130 years ago. And that was one of the ideas that I was thinking about this design fund. It's of a similar position to say we want to be a community like Columbus, Indiana, where a family set up a fund for architects to design magnificent buildings. And it has put them on the map for 60 years. And if we had the vision to be a design community, and so people come here because you get to walk around and look at cool buildings, great buildings, and not just Cape shingles, but visionary, interesting design that says we're alive, we're thinking, we're not afraid of the future. I think that all of these things, all of this density, whether you're building in town on a found lot, you're up at the depot bus station, there's so many places to put thoughtfully well-designed buildings that become an asset to the fabric. We don't have to start with taking raw land out of the raw, it can be one of the considerations. But again, design is your greatest opportunity to help build a better fabric. There's so many parking lots and pieces that are, not being helpful, all that asphalt.
Well, that's a great point, because you're absolutely right. So when we take a big picture look, and we look down at Falmouth, particularly you think about the downtown area, and you look at really what we have going on there. And can you look 20 years ahead and say, this is where we want to be, or even 10 years ahead? I know the project with Shiverick's Pond, beautiful, with the boardwalk that's going around it, like a real community center where people can walk to. And you're right, if there's a parking lot, what can be done? Can something more designed for housing be there? What's the alternative to parking? Well, there's there will be other alternatives we can come up with, but can we actually move things around like on a puzzle board and use space better? It's already
Yes,
existing.
Or
and these,
repurpose.
yeah.
One of my favorite projects we did was, the Oddfellows Hall building,
Wonderful.
which is right next to Town Hall, and that was it was a school at one point, it was a dance recital, I think it was the Elks Club for a while, and the town repurposed it, the Falmouth Housing Trust actually did the project, it was a great project, right in town, 4 apartments, and
Beautiful, I've been in them, they're lovely.
repurposing existing municipal buildings, or buildings is, it doesn't, like Jill said, it doesn't have to be raw land. There's a lot of structures in Falmouth that, have potential to be housing.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that it's clear that when we build affordable housing, we actually build affordable housing more durable than market rate housing. We put more money into our projects probably than someone who's just building a normal apartment. Reason being is that we know, unfortunately, that our tenants are a little bit more rougher, on the buildings than other folks might be. So we use top-of-the-line material, top-of-the-line finishes, and I think that's really key. And I'm not so sure we demand that of all the affordable housing projects that are being built. It's very important because these buildings have to last a very long time. And I've always been concerned about design of our projects because I want to be proud of them when I drive by them with my daughter or members of my family, as part of the community. So design in good quality doesn't necessarily have to cost a lot. I've told Jill one of the keys to doing affordable housing well is taking inexpensive material and making it look expensive. I work with an architect in San Diego, Rob Quigley, who would take concrete and just amazing what he could do with it for affordable housing projects. And that's really one of the keys, is taking inexpensive material and use it in a very creative way so it looks great.
And so what you're talking about mostly is the rental units that are being built, right? Because
Yes.
they gotta last long because you have tenants moving in and out.
Yeah.
I think Elisa from Hack had mentioned in the last session that in a community, 30% of the housing should be rental. I think she said one out of 3 should be rental, and we're like at 7% or something like that.
Yeah.
So, obviously,
demand for rental.
huge demand for rental. That's the feedback we're getting at the chamber from business owners who are looking for rentals for their employees. Not everybody is going to want to live here forever. Not everybody's looking for a first-time home situation. Some people are looking to just rent. If I like it here, maybe then I'll move on to purchase my first home. So every step of the way, it's really important to have good rentals and first-time home buyer programs, et cetera. So to your point, Jill, which we didn't talk about earlier in the other 2 sessions, although of course Wayne's got an existing lot right now, your project going on, that makes a lot of good common sense. But how do we educate people? How do we get, who takes the lead on this to get people to understand that we need to start thinking creatively, or we're just going to be a town filled with old people?
I think the business owners. I think the business owners need to get together. I think the restaurants owners, the hotels, the builders, all of the business owners in town need to get together, because it's our employees that are looking for places to live. Our employees are, one of my employees is living, in his mother's basement. I mean, that's what it is. And so we, as a community, as a year-round community, year-round business owners, we need to get together, and because it's our livelihood, it's our employees, the people that we care about that need it. So I think that to me is a key. And it's and the town too. It's the firefighters and the teachers
Right.
and the police officers and all of the the town employees. The town needs to recognize that too. The town wants to remain.
For example, the project that's being proposed by EDIC, I think, has the potential to be incredibly helpful and important and a great location. To me, that's the place for us to step up and help you have it really well designed and then well represented, so that the thing that people see is a rendering of a building that they can say, I get it, yeah, great, fine, I can go back to my life, finish my day and not have to worry about it. And it's one very strong, successful project that brings a lot of housing right where we need it. And people start to say, oh, this can be positive, this can work. Of course, I'm going to pitch this, but to me, the graphics of things really matter. You can speak about the need for this and the need for that, but it's really people coming forward with a project and then making it so that people can say, oh, yes, yes, that's great. I think it's everything, because otherwise, my first reaction when I'm a neighbor to your
Sure.
project. One of my neighbors came and said, have you seen what's doing? I said, no, I don't know anything. I've been too busy. So I look at the drawings, and that's what I'm looking for. Where do they have the talent? Have they hired the team? Are these people who have made really cool projects before? And that's their next step. That's not what that first phase was. But that's what I think people are looking for, even who aren't designers, is how's this going to work?
Sure.
Michael, I'd take a little bit different twist on your question, and that is that as important as architecture is, as important as obviously having the raw material, i.e. the parcel, the underdeveloped building, a lot of this does come back to funding. And I think what's important, Michael made the comment that the Falmouth Affordable Housing Fund is probably in the best position it's been in any number of years with some of the funding that was done in November. But I think it's important that the group of people that Christian pointed to remember that this is a problem that requires sustainable funding. And we had a one-time windfall, if you will, because of, frankly, some of the funding that came to the town from outside sources. But I do think going forward, it's going to be important that as that money gets used, it's replenished. Because the reality is, when a developer wants to look at being able to have the kind of subsidies that this housing requires, whether it's from a design standpoint or just the reality of construction materials, they want to see some certainty in the funding path. And so as the Affordable Housing Fund, is used for good projects, we've got to replenish that. And I think there was some good progress made by the community at the November town meeting, where we did some creative things with the hotel motel short-term rental taxes.
Right.
There was a community impact fee that was added, but there are some other good ideas, I think, that are much more substantial in terms of their potential proceeds. And I would like to think that the kind of people that Christian talked about, the business community, whether it's the retailers or the hotel motel, this community has a relatively short list of concentrated businesses that generate most of the activity. We'll be able to be supportive of some of those initiatives as they get rolled out by some of the affordable housing advocates in the community over the coming months.
And I think they will be, because I think what we're trying to do, and part of this whole series, which originally was going to be targeted at businesses, business members, and then we expanded it after talking to FCTV and talking to everybody else who want to make this available to the entire community, is that the businesses do understand. I think many of the businesses understand that if something is not done, they're not going to be in business.
Right. Yep.
And that I think that business owners and people who are the stakeholders would be willing to look at creative things. So you're talking about like maybe a transfer tax or something else. And, that's just good common sense. It's good for the community, it's good for business.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be a ton of money, because the other alternative is you're gonna double what you pay everybody, right?
Yep.
And then you can just double property taxes,
Right.
right? I mean, so there's a lot of ways to get to where we need to get. And that's part of, but it doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be that outrageous. It can be a little bit going in, and a certain amount of money should be going to help support and develop this affordable housing if we truly want to have a town of equilibrium and consistency for all. So I welcome those ideas, and hopefully people will come forward, and there'll be other initiatives going forward, and we'll have an opportunity to educate people. But I think people will embrace it because they understand. We hear it all the time. I get calls from people who'll talk about, we're looking for help. Do you have anybody? We kind of run a little bank, but it's really challenging. Business owners will tell me, I'm working 15, 16, 18 hours a day because I can't hire anybody.
Right.
I've got to do all. I've got to run my business, and then on top of it, everything else. And how long can somebody go like that? Because the reality is, somebody had asked me, hey, how did the businesses fare in Falmouth during the pandemic? I'm like, well, it was mixed, but due to PPP money and everything else, still, I think all in all, you'll find we didn't lose many businesses in Falmouth. We did not. Some businesses did very well, some survived, some went along and did okay. But the biggest feedback we've gotten from people is, I didn't make as much money as I could have because I didn't have the help to
Right.
do more work. So that's a serious problem. So I think businesses understand that, but,
Years ago, I used to think it was mainly for the summer season in tourism and hospitality. We're an office of 13, so 12 people in addition to me. I have 3 of us, I'm one of them, that live on the Cape. 3 out of 13.
sure.
Yep.
And I have 3 people that are commuting an hour and a half each way.
Wow.
Yep.
And
There you
that
go.
isn't sustainable,
There
It's
you
not.
go.
not at all. So it's a real crisis. But I want to go back to this cost of these things. When I had the opportunity to get involved with Michael's long history of knowledge about making affordable housing projects happen. So we designed a neat prototype for affordable housing and for an accessory dwelling unit. And it was based on the Sears Roebuck model
Oh.
of 100 years ago,
In
where
the
you could
book.
go in a catalog
Yeah.
and pick what design and then order that kit. And so the idea was developed that you could order, 600 square feet or 700 or 1 bedroom or a 2 bedroom, and then when you had the money, you could buy the mudroom. And then you could buy the ADA accessible mother-in-law's bedroom or an office and the bicycle storage shed. And these are all components that you can buy by clicking a button on your computer and buying these units that could be shipped because they're made elsewhere and brought to Falmouth. So independent of this idea of, we've got someone that's making these things for us, when we worked of putting the numbers together, that was Christian's role in making this package complete. So they're site-sensitive, intelligent designs with dignity and some joy. Energy efficient, so they're net zero energy. They have sunlight. They have sensible spaces where you can store things and live and have a big dining table for homework and computers and everything. And the numbers weren't remotely affordable. And so I think it's interesting to look at the front end and then the support to build it. So whatever that X per square foot is that Michael can pull together through all these funding sources at the state and the region and all this stuff, and you could say, okay, I can patch together whatever that dollar is per square foot that the state has decided is appropriate for affordable. Well, that's not going to get you site-sensitive, energy-efficient, resilient, strong materials that hold up. It's not going to buy that. It's going to buy what we see in most projects. So if we had a community fund that supported design and supported the gap of what the state says, this is what we think these projects should cost, but they don't. And that was before COVID
Yeah.
pricing.
I can't imagine.
And then
what's
supported
done now.
the gap. Now, whether that's 50,000 a unit or 100,000 over, and say, we want to make a commitment to durable, intelligent, joyful, good-looking buildings that have aesthetic dignity, we're willing to pay on both ends of those things to make it happen. And so maybe it's beyond this patching, because we cut that project 12
Yeah.
ways. We reduced the insulation at some point from a passive house standard, you know, so you're just kind of, you took some windows, kind of keep working your way back, and we're still not getting there. So I think we can't fool ourselves that the metrics that the state sets up as appropriate funding are going to get us the product that we would like built in our community.
Michael, I'm curious, what's our year-round population, and then what is our summer population?
So year-round is approximately 32,000
Yeah.
people, of which 45% are senior citizens.
Okay,
By 2030, that number will be still 32,000, zero net growth, give or take.
yeah.
But that senior population will be 60%.
Oh, my.
There's an additional 32 to 35,000 summer
Okay,
residents who are here. So
so the-
50% of the homes are second homes.
So the 35,000 people that come down for the summer and use our restaurants, use our fire services, go to our library, how are they contributing? I mean, are we saddling this problem on the backs of our year-round community, or do we have to look at the people that have second homes that
Well,
are coming down and
It's
and
interesting.
using all of our services and driving on our roads and
Right.
getting in accidents, and I mean, all these things that happen, and then they go back to wherever they go in the winter, and you know, I mean, I think we're a relatively affluent summer population that comes here. I mean,
We are.
So how do we tap
So
into that?
they're paying how
But I
those
could be
folks
wrong,
are-
they might be paying too.
Well,
but-
they're paying in property taxes.
Right,
Because if you look at the assessed value of those homes, if you
Yeah.
look at the second homes, we talked about this in the first section. So $0 to $500,000, the property bills are being sent mostly to a Falmouth zip code.
Right.
When you start, now, that number's probably higher now because the assessed values are
Yeah.
higher. But when you start going up in $100,000 increments,
The
the
tax
tax
goes-
bill's going off Cape. So when you start getting into these really high priced, like, homes, then those are the folks that are paying the bulk of the taxes.
And does any of that tax money, some of it goes to the CPC, right? So some of it is set aside.
Some of it is set aside, but, the reality is it's still running, that's money going toward funding schools, and they're not
Yeah.
using the schools, police,
right.
fire, et cetera. So, but I will tell you, to the point we were talking about earlier, this whole notion that, our economy is a year-round economy now.
Yeah.
It's not just a tourism-based economy. Tourism is always important and always will be. But we have a decline in hotel rooms. Every year we lose hotel rooms. Some of that has to do with the fact that these investors come in and buy these Airbnbs, these homes, and turn them into Airbnbs. But it's really the second homeowners who really, frankly, have a lot of disposable income, will come down here. They will support the restaurants, the boutiques, and a lot of the local businesses. So that in and of itself, just by them being here, is a huge boost
Yeah.
to the economy.
Yeah.
And we want those people to come.
Oh, yeah,
and-
absolutely.
And be here. But, I think it's also trying to go into maybe neighborhoods or areas where you have that type of population. It might be like, I'm not looking for, we talked about that in the last one. We don't want any affordable housing
Right.
in my backyard,
Right.
The NIMBY, right? The not in my backyard thing, so.
Or banana.
Oh, what's the,
Banana.
banana.
Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anybody.
Okay, there you go. I haven't heard that one, but,
Hey, Michael,
yes.
I've had a number of business people, mostly restaurant owners, mostly on Main Street, who have approached me because their housing for their summer staff is so desperate. And they're willing to actually put money into projects. They're willing to put some of their money into secure housing that they could have for their employees, know that it's always there for a number of years. So we're starting to get that involvement of the business community. They're not just giving money, it would be, hopefully there'd be some return on that if it's a rental
Of
project.
course, yeah.
But I think, and I think it was mentioned that, having some sort of private equity fund that helps support, where there is a return. I've heard of a lot of folks in the community, what can I do to help? What can I do to help? And I know that,
That's an outstanding idea.
yeah, and I know that the Falmouth Affordable Housing Fund accepts donations too. But I think that we've got to find some other vehicles and not just rely on that itself. The other thing, you're just talking about property taxes. One of the issues that we have is that we take mostly a vacant piece of property, which is maybe is assessed at $500,000, and we build a $5 million project. We get taxed, property tax on that $5 million. we need some relief. When I say we, I think I'm talking about the other affordable housing developers too, at least for a period of time, from that big increase from a $500,000 assessment to a $5 million assessment, for a certain period of time, which would really help both homeowners and also rental projects that get built too. It takes a couple of years when you build a rental project, affordable rental project. Yeah, we lease it up rather quickly, but it still takes a couple, excuse me, a couple of years to stabilize it.
Sure.
Right.
So some assistance and help with property taxes would go a long way to help those projects too. But it's interesting about the business people, mostly restaurateurs, who are very much concerned
Well, and
about.
some people, like the late, great Bill Zammer, had the foresight to see that and
Yeah.
bought buildings and housed his employees.
That's what
Charged
he
them
did.
low rent, and it probably paid for itself. And then there are other, I know the Seacrest Beach Hotel, excuse me, has gone out and bought other properties. They bus employees to Onset or East Falmouth.
They're getting
So
very
more-
hard to find those properties now.
Very hard to
unfortunately.
find.
Very
They're not,
competitive.
obviously, they're not affordable.
Yeah.
I had a conversation last week with one of the members of the leadership at Hui, and we were talking about this topic. And he mentioned that in some roundtable conversations with his employees, the notion of bringing up housing that was actually off Cape, and then but creating the transportation links to our community. So you might be able to house people at a reasonable commuting distance, and they could do it. It's a little bit like, I hate to use this analogy, but I will, the way that San Francisco became a housing alternative for people that were in the Silicon Valley.
Right.
The same idea on a smaller scale. But if the challenge is, because again, the magnitude of the problem here is significant enough that, we could, if we had housing that was dedicated to Hui, research students or scientists, and they had to ride for 30 or 45 minutes on a bus, that might be a way to still have the workforce that we needed, even though the housing is not necessarily in our community.
Could that be an electric bus that they ride in?
That's right.
So interestingly, MBL and Hui have quite a bit of housing. And so it really just goes to show how much more housing is needed, is that they already have housing. And so one of the things that I mentioned in the second session is that one of the hats that I wear is at a microscope company in Woods Hole, and we have 2 interns, a postdoc and an undergrad. And if I can't get them into the MBL housing for the summer, they're probably one of them's gonna have to stay with me and one's gonna have to stay with my coworker, very likely, because there's nowhere else to put them, even though they have so much housing in the Woods Hole area, because they have such they're also year-round, but there's a lot of summer scientists that come in.
Yeah.
And so an interesting idea would be to talk to the institutions in Woods Hole about the housing that they have. A lot of it is not winterized, so they only use it during the summer, but
Right.
maybe there's an opportunity to temporarily house people in the off season, so that they could save up to then move elsewhere, and have a year-round thing. Another thing I wanted to think about was the repurposing of old buildings. And there's the Old Royal that's on Main Street, and I'm thinking about the opportunity to make that into micro units, which sounds like Mr.
Yes.
Valley has experience doing. So other than the obvious, it would probably be very expensive. What are some of the limitations for doing a really big project like that?
Well, it's not
Cost.
really money, believe it or not. It may be cost, but as you know, we have more money here locally. The state has a lot more money towards affordable housing. A lot has to do with sort of the current ownership and what their desires are, and timing. Timing seems to be a big issue on things like that.
And you'd have to
being
bring
able put
Jill
the
in
money
to
together.
redo a whole facelift on that if we
Yeah.
want good
Yes,
design, right?
yes, Yes, I could.
Yeah.
The other thing, though, just talking about, who has available housing, we send people all over the place to look for housing. We don't have a central place that we can say, go see Housing Falmouth. And they will coordinate everything that you need, whether it's housing with the Housing Authority, the Housing Corp, privately, or whatever. We need sort of one area where all this information, the Woods Hole, Hui has a pretty good website. But, again, it's go to Hui, go here, go there. We send people all over the place to find housing.
That's an
They
excellent
go-
idea.
They go and see Michael, but we need some sort of entity or something that is called Housing Falmouth,
Well-
and that's where you go if you're looking for housing.
And I'll tell you,
Okay.
years ago, not that many years ago, people would come to the chamber with a 3x5 card and said, I'm looking to rent my house, if you know anybody in the off-season, and people would come in and we'd be able, but nobody does that anymore because
Yeah.
everyone's doing the weekly rental and then leaving them vacant all winter. But the repurposing and using vacant buildings in the winter is
Mhm.
another tremendous way, because so many homes sit vacant in
Yeah.
Falmouth all
Yeah.
winter long.
Yeah.
You know, how do you incentivize, somebody had talked about, how do you incentivize the homeowner to do that?
Well, what they, excuse me, Rick, what they did in the Vineyard is that they gave people, they meaning the town of Oak Bluffs or the other towns there, gave people money to offset the loss that they would have if they rented it on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
I mean, so, you know,
That's
it's a big
So
check,
it's
but
subsidized.
still,
It's like has to
they're
be
subsidizing.
it's
So look, if
subsidized.
you agree to rent it to people year-round, we will make up that difference that you would have lost.
That's
Yeah,
an
so-
interesting idea.
Could something like that be a short-term solution while other things are in play? Again, we need to start looking at all different solutions.
Right.
You know, short-term solutions, long-term solutions, obviously the education and getting people to buy in and getting the collaboration long-term is important, but what can we do right now?
I think the short-term solution is something that we shouldn't just ignore. It's not not a solution, but as we discussed, there are people who like literally die in the winter because they don't have a place to stay,
Mhm.
where we have hundreds, if not thousands, of homes in Falmouth that are empty. So the short-term solutions, I think, in some ways are just as important to look at as the long-term solutions.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got to believe there's a lot of talent in town, and that putting our heads together and collaborating, this really can be achieved and solved. But again, I think it's finding collaboration and leadership. I think it's supporting the town and the town making it mission critical in order to understand that, you know, it's going to be the death of our town as we know it. It's going to be an incredibly high-priced retirement community that is not going to be able to sustain the businesses. And then, as we talked about in the first session, that's all great. You can come down here and pay $3 million for your retirement home, but when you gotta go to the ER
Right.
and get in
Mhm.
line behind everybody else and wait 6 hours because there's not the staff or the capacity, then it becomes problematic. So how do we get back to, you know, equity and equilibrium and keeping families here? And we talked a little bit about the schools. You know, we have a school that was built for 1,400 kids. I understand the Mashpee kids were there at the time when it was built. There's 800 kids at our high school. And what do we do to get those families and those numbers back? I mean, that's, you know, my daughter graduated last year. There was 180 kids in her graduating class from Falmouth High School. And it's not because kids are going to other schools. In fact, Falmouth has more people coming in because of school choice than they do going to either a charter school or Upper Cape. So that's the number of that aged kids. They can't get lifeguards to open the beaches this year.
Yeah,
They're working
yeah,
really
I
hard
mean,
to do
that's-
that. So if we don't do something immediate and looking at those solutions, the town is going to kind of die. And, you know, like, I hate that saying in Nantucket, it makes me sick, where the millionaires serve the billionaires. I don't know if you've heard that, but that's like their little tagline.
No, I haven't heard that.
Yeah.
And, yeah, they've got them on shirts and people wear them over there. And I'm like, you know, that's kind of like the direction it's gone in over there. And do we really want that to happen here? I'd say no.
Definitely
No,
not.
we're a working community. and
Right, working
Always have
community,
been.
yeah.
Yeah.
From the farmers that were here, and fishermen.
Yeah, everybody should have the ability to live and work in their own community
Yeah.
in some capacity, so.
Yeah. And I think it's a problem that we can solve. You
I
talked
agree.
about partnerships, and I think we have a lot of great ideas. We have good leadership, I believe, you know, at town hall and elected officials. And I think it's a problem that can be solved.
I
It's
agree.
been along for way too long.
Yeah, I agree. I think you have a very thoughtful population, people who want to be involved, you know, committed town meeting members, certainly a committed select board. I think that it can be done, and our whole hope with this whole series has been to really educate everybody, and it's been really wonderful having this conversation. So I'm going to ask you for any parting thoughts you may have based on the discussion on creative solutions, and, you know, design is key, but what's your parting thought on, you know, moving forward and what you hope to see?
Well, something just occurred to me in the last few moments is that this process of saying we need to build affordable housing, there's no reason to believe that most people know how to build anything. It's not a natural process. And this idea of going to the Royal Nursing Home, there's no reason why that owner, whomever they may be, understands what it would look like to take that building into its next life as housing. And so the narrative of we need housing, okay, but there are people at this table, it's all we do for a living, and there's no reason to believe anybody else should know how to do that
Right.
naturally.
Absolutely, you're right.
You know, there's a lot of HGTV, right, where you watch it flip and
Oh,
flip
Yeah,
and
right.
flip. But they make it look, easy. But
Yeah.
I think helping people develop their projects, look at an underutilized building and say, let's go to that owner with a fund and say, we're going to help you think about what it would look like to take this building, and we will manage that master plan for you. Can we work with you on a master plan? So maybe there's a process to help people think about how to move their land, their building, their redevelopment towards housing.
That's a fantastic idea.
Michael?
I'm optimistic, as I just said, that we can solve this problem. It's been around for a long time. I think we've got a lot of people focused in on it now. Putting this together, that you put together, Michael, and the chamber, and educating the community on what the needs are, I think goes a long way. But I'm optimistic that we can tackle this and we can increase the number of units that we have here. It's going to take a lot of work and money too. But I think we have the desire to do it, and I think we can.
I think I'm optimistic as well, especially after the conversations today. I think parting thoughts are for people to get involved, having these kinds of conversations, reaching out to their elected officials, whether that's town meeting members or select board members or legislators, and giving us some ideas. Getting involved in, like we were talking about, getting artists involved and what your talent is and how you can, whatever your business is, whatever your passion is, use that to get involved in this particular issue, because that's what we're focusing on. But there's other things in town that people can use their skills on. So I will leave with get involved.
Thanks, Angela. Awesome. Christian?
Well, I think it's incumbent on the business owners. I think, as a builder in town, and I think there's lots of us, lots of builders that we all make a living here. I think we need to get together and we know how to build, I hope. And I think we need to get together and say, hey, where are our young carpenters going to live? And we don't have any young carpenters anymore. Why? Because they don't have any place to live. Well, okay. Where are the plumbers and the electricians and the guys and the next generation of trades going to live? And how is my generation and my children's generation going to live here? And I think it's important that, as I said, as business owners, whether it's a restaurant or it's a hotel or the trades, is that we got to get together on this, because the statistics you shared about the population is scary. Yeah, I mean that's reality.
That's the highway we're heading down right now, so.
Yep.
Very scary. Thank you, Christian. Wayne?
Well, so that I don't repeat what's just been said, I would first of all like to start by thanking you and the chamber for hosting this, because I think one of the first steps in this is awareness, and I think that there's no doubt, I think that in my mind anyway, that this situation is probably fairly characterized as a crisis, and it's moved quickly over the last 12 months as we've all had our head down focused on other very important issues. But I think the fact that you and the chamber have stepped up to really bring some focus to this issue is extremely important, because I do think that as a community, I'm really encouraged to hear that the business community, that the two of you who are as close as anyone is to the business community can get their shoulder into this. I think that kind of leadership and the collaboration that would then fall out of it is critically important, because we've got to find creative and sustainable, kind of solutions and answers to this. And it's great that you've shown the leadership to put this program together, so thank you.
Well, thank you. A pleasure. We felt as though it was very important, and hopefully we've educated you folks at home, and I want to, on behalf of the panelists here, thank again the Cooperative Bank of Cape Cod and FCTV for sponsoring and supporting this. Please, if this is the first session you're turning into, go back and watch session 1 and session 2, and I think that you'll learn a lot. As Angela said, get involved. This is our town, and we need to work together and collaborate to make sure that we have a wonderful place for our children, our grandchildren, and anybody else who wants to live and work here. So on behalf of the Falmouth Chamber of Commerce, thanks so much for tuning in.